Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karim Brohi. I am Professor of Trauma Sciences at Queen Mary, but more importantly, I'm a trauma surgeon based at the Royal London Hospital in East London. And my job essentially is to stop people dying. And I try to do that on a regular basis. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. And what I'm going to present to you today is an evolution of things that have come along both clinically and scientifically to recognize where the main block is now, not just for trauma, but for a whole host of conditions. So there's an aphorism in medicine called the tyranny of distance, which essentially says the farther you are from hospital for a bunch of critical diseases, the more likely you are to die or to have a very poor functional outcome. If you've got a brain injury and you're far from hospital, you're going to have a bad outcome. If you had a heart attack and you're far from hospital, you're going to have a bad outcome. And the time window actually between having a normal outcome and being able to get back to work and ending up either dead or in a persistent vegetative state is the order of an hour. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, depending on the severity of what has happened to you. And we now have a lot of tools and drugs and blood products and science to support treating these patients. And I know that for most of the patients who come to me, I can stop them bleeding, restore their blood flow. A cardiologist colleague knows that if he can get a heart that's still beating, he can unblock the coronary artery. A neurointervention radiologist can unblock the artery that is clogged. But if the patients don't get to us in time, then they're not going to do well or they'll die. And so I can fix people, but they'll die. And they won't die in front of me immediately. They'll die a few hours later, a couple of days later, as their organs just fail. And you don't have to be that far from hospital, of course. So the average time in London for you to get your heart replumbed, if you've had a heart attack, is about an hour and 45 minutes. If you're living in a skyscraper, in a tower block, it'll take you longer to get down. Obviously, if you're in a rural area, it's longer. If you're in a low and middle income country, you end up with huge inequities. And especially at the moment, the real issue is battlefield casualties. So where you can't access the casualty, either on the battlefield itself, combat casualties, or terrorist events, the Manchester Arena bombing, where you've got lots of casualties lying there with no access to healthcare who are just dying, essentially, because their cells have lost their blood supply and are struggling through the processes that are activated through that. And this is essentially intractable for this large number of diseases. And so what I believe we absolutely need to do and can do now is develop a new field of survival medicine. There is the absolute possibility to remove the tyranny of distance from modern healthcare by a focused program looking in humans at the really critical time point in the first few minutes and hours after injury. And the reason for that is we have new science which really shows that this is not an oxygen problem. Cells aren't just dying because they have a lack of oxygen. They're dying because of evolutionarily unsurvivable mechanisms that are activated, that become overactivated, sitting at the heart of innate immunity and the interface with the endothelial cell and the subendothelial organ. And there are multiple pathways that get activated, which mean there are multiple pathways which can potentially be intervened on. The problem is super difficult to study because it's in the street or it's in the minutes that the patient's arrived in the hospital. There's also a huge amount of variability depending on who you are, what sex you are, how old you are, what your underlying DNA is in terms of your variants that you might have in these pathways. For trauma, what injuries you might have. For cardiovascular care, what underlying cardiovascular disease you might have. And then actually what other treatments you've been given. So the hard piece here is to investigate in this critical time window across all the variability axes. And the other hard piece is that although there's huge promise here, we're stuck with animal therapy, animal experiments. And if we cannot move away from animal experiments into human tissues, we're not going to get anywhere. And so the difference now, though, is in the UK at least, and probably uniquely in the UK, we have the NHS infrastructure that allows us to do the clinical research at the roadside as soon as patients hit the emergency department across the country, where we can actually do that study. Plus, scientifically, we now have human-based organ-on-chip technologies that we can model the disease based on calibrated data from the human data, and we can develop digital twins of those organ chips so that we can map the responses over the entire spectrum of variability. So INTERCEPT, essentially, my program, ideally develops an auto-injector that is stuck on the back of a defibrillator, but it also could be a suite of drugs defined for different indications, heart attack, stroke, different times, whether it's in the field or whether it's in the hospital, plus a whole suite of discovery diagnostics so you can understand who will benefit across that variability spectrum, and the AI becomes decision support tools to help people deliver it. And so this is an absolutely hard but doable problem that has to come together into one piece, and the UK, I think, can really be a front leader in this. Thank you.